So, I'm watching Drunken Film School. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. Great channel, really fun. But you guys had to be really, really drunk when you did this one. The whole 70s, 80s thing. Just saying. But we're going to get into it just a little bit more. Because first we're going to talk about some of the classic deep films of the 70s. I got a list brought up here, just some random 70s films, and I'm going to run through the deep films, some of the deep blockbuster hits of the 70s. Blockbuster, since you know, Jaws was 75, so that's a whole 5 years, a half a decade of films making blockbusters. Since you said that, you know, blockbusters was the whole ruination of films, when I seem to remember watching you guys go out and buy some blockbusters in some recent videos. Yeah, I think you might like those. But here, let's go into some of the deep films. Let's talk about 10 with Dudley Moore and Bo Derek. It's a good comedy. It's a Star Trek: The Motion Picture. No, let's not. We're not going to talk about that one. I'm a Star Trek fan, and Star Trek fans don't really like to talk about Star Trek: The Motion Picture too much. We just not something that we want to do. But you know, there's a lot of great films. Stuff like Enter the Dragon. It's a very by Robert Clouse. Great Bruce Lee film. Very mainstream. Very much done for the mainstream audience of Bruce Lee. You gotta wait credit. Great stuff like that. Oh, there's some really good films. Look at stuff like Blazing Saddles, another great Mel Brooks film. A fantastic 70s film. Love it. It's a great mainstream comedy film that I watched in theater in 1974 before blockbusters were supposedly big. Jaws, and yeah, again, for you know the original blockbuster. And let's get into the deep films from the 70s. Stuff like Hal Needham's Smokey and the Bandit. We can talk about Smokey and the Bandit, or Tinto Brass and the star-studded film by Penthouse called Caligula. That was a quality 70s film there. The musical version of Scrooge. I gotta love that. Grease. Nothing is more deep than the movie Grease, that tells you to basically, if you're a female, the best thing that you can do to get a guy is to like change your entire personality, and at the end of the movie you're going to fly away in a rocket-fueled car that for some reason, although the movie's been pretty much straightforward all the way through, it's fantasy now. The car flies, you know, for a few minutes, then the movie ends and the car crashes and they all die. So that's why there's no real Grease 2 except for the one with Biker Heaven. And we have got great movies. Taxi Driver, great film. Carrie, great film. Just great action movies like Billy Jack. Let's talk about Billy Jack. I'm sure you want to talk about Billy Jack and you know the other great Billy Jack films done by Tom Laughlin. And no, I'm not going to do that to you. I'm not going to make you guys talk about Billy Jack. It's a horrible, horrible film. And you know, this is where I think you went wrong. I'm going to talk about the 80s in a few minutes. This is what I think you meant. You wanted the deep films. You wanted the really quality deep films. The time when film making was kind of in that big crux of experimentation, and when they were doing a lot of really deep cool stuff. So let's talk about some deep cool stuff. And then this is not 80s stuff, so it's not 70s stuff either. But let's just get there and talk about some films that were really really well done. Let's talk about 2001: A Space Odyssey, or The Sound of Music, Lawrence of Arabia. Classic films like Mary Poppins, Psycho, which revolutionized filmmaking. Line in the Winter, which was a great Peter O'Toole film. How about Dr. Strangelove? Once Upon a Time in the West with Sergio Leone. A great classic, To Kill a Mockingbird. The Graduate. I'm sure all of these films you might have thought were in the 70s, but none of them are. Bonnie and Clyde. Hell, just The Great Escape with Steve McQueen, Richard Attenborough, Dr. Zhivago, West Side Story, just classics like Spartacus and My Fair Lady and Rosemary's Baby, things like Lolita and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Movies that make sense, like that are musicals, like Oliver. Uh, Classic films like, of course, Dr. No and From Russia with Love. From Russia with Love more than Dr. No. I gotta say, Dr. No doesn't age as well as the rest of them. And just great films like Franco Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet with the beautiful Livia Hussey, of course. William Wyler's How to Steal a Million with Audrey Hepburn and Peter O'Toole. Goodbye, Mr. Chips, The Magnificent Seven. The only good movie that Bill ever came out of a Billy Jack format in 1967 called The Born Losers. The Dirty Dozen, and just to throw them a couple in there, let's put in Midnight Cowboy, and that's the 1960s. And when people talk about the 70s a lot, and the great era, and the great decade of how the 70s was the greatest decade for film, I like the 80s because, you know what, I like blockbustery, shallowy stuff. But if we're going to talk about the decade that defined film and filmmaking at its core, if you want to talk about the Gonzo style of filmmaking, if you want to go into the whole Criterion-esque filmmaking, then it's the 60s. It's not the 70s. It's not the 80s, where neither one of us are right on saying that those are the great filmmaking decade era of all time. They're not. They're just really not. There's some good films in the 70s. There's some good films in the 80s. I'm going to mention some of them now, just so we can do a nice balance. But if you want to talk about the decade that defined filmmaking and the way that films will be done, that would be the 60s. Goes without saying, look through your movie you're watching. Look through the movies you're watching now. Look through the stuff that you've bought, and all those classics that you like and you reference. It's 60s films. But let's talk about some of the cheesy 80s stuff, because you know what? The 80s did not ruin films. You know what ruined films? The 90s ruined films for me.
Hey.
Yeah, I know.
What the hell?
I'm sorry, guys. The 90s ruined films for me. And the 80s had some stuff, was it deep? Maybe not all the time. Was it good?
90s.
Great. A Christmas Story. Bob Clark, classic Christmas film, love it. The Breakfast Club. Nobody understood the teenagers and parents the way that we didn't mix, the way we didn't meet, or what was going on inside our heads more than John Hughes. And The Breakfast Club is the perfect film for that. And you want to know a perfect action film? It may not be deep, and it doesn't have to be, but it is a perfect film for its type, and that's Die Hard. It's got a great villain with Alan Rickman, of course, an amazing protagonist with Bruce Willis, and just a really good film. And it didn't have to be something it wasn't. It didn't have to put on airs. It was just a good action film, and you know what? You can still watch it today. You can't always watch some of those movies that do come off as a little bit, just a wee bit pretentious sometimes, like I do sometimes in these videos. Yeah, kind of. Classic films like Terminator. Not my favorite horror film, but for a lot of people, this is a definitive ghost story, and that's The Shining. Kubrick. Kubrick did some great stuff. One of the great films, and I still consider this one of the greats. And if you're a black rapper from MTV, then actually a white rapper, or even, it doesn't matter. If you're a rapper from MTV or a gangster style, then Scarface is a movie that's on your everywhere. Watch MTV Cribs. Every episode of MTV Cribs always ends with like, and yo, I got Scarface. Trust me, it's there. The Outsiders, Francis Ford Coppola film. Great film. Nothing spoke to my generation or teenagers more than the 80s did, that actually took the time to take us and treat us like human beings. Blade Runner, one of the great science fiction neo-noir films of all time. 1982. Aliens. Enough said. Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Much better, much deeper than it's ever been given credit for. You want to talk about war movies? Let's talk Full Metal Jacket in 1987. Let's talk about the best Star Wars film that ever came out, The Empire Strikes Back in 1980. Let's talk about Dirty Dancing, a movie that seems like just and on surface it's just a kind of a little tiny film about music and dance, and has the relationship between the father and daughter. Relationships were key in the 80s, and you can look back to the 80s films and you will see relationships are the key aspects in a lot of these films. Great films, great, and you want to talk popcorn films, Raiders of the Lost Ark. And you know what, guys? There's nothing wrong with being a popcorn film. 1989 Batman, still the best Batman. Airplane, still one of the funniest comedies of all time. Empire of the Sun, Steven Spielberg at his best with Christian Bale and John Malkovich. Platoon, by many considered the greatest war picture of all time. Dead Poets Society, Raging Bull, Amadeus, RoboCop, The Elephant Man, and the amazing David Lynch Elephant Man with John Hurt and Anthony Hopkins. And, you know, I could go into a deep discussion on what makes one better or what compares one to the other, but honestly, I really don't need to. It speaks for itself. Now, all that being said, Logan, Blu-ray, great guys. Subscribe to their channels. Subscribe to Drunken Film School. Watch us banter back and forth, because, you know, I definitely am the Roger Ebert to their Cisco, because, you know, I can write just a little bit better. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time. Because right now for me it's not time for a beer, because my senses have to be sharp. It's time for tea.